In this video, I'm going to talk to you about writing an article with a focus on the sections of an article. Scholar articles include different sections, and I'm going to talk to you about abstract, introduction and literature review, methods, results and discussion, and conclusion briefly. Let's start with an abstract. Abstract is the most succinct, brief summary of the article, focusing on the rationale, the aim of the article study, methods, findings, and implications. So while writing the abstract, you will have a very limited space because journals usually have a word limit on writing the abstract, 150 words, 250 words. So usually each of these need to be summarized in a single sentence. So you need to mention the rationale. The rationale is like the problem of the study. So you express that it needs to kind of give the reason for your study. And then the aim of the study, what you aim to do in the study, the purpose. So it's going to be related to your research questions, obviously. And methods will need to summarize your methods, including one or two sentences about your participants and your methods. So it could include whichever information from the meta section is the most relevant, you need to put it here. And the findings will need to summarize the main findings in a sentence or two. After that, you need to write the consequence of your study, what implication may have for research and practice. So these five things will need to be in your abstract and in that order. Introduction and literature review can be separate sections, or literature review can be within the introduction part. If they're separate sections, introduction usually is a short section where you introduce the problem. And then literature review starts. And in the literature review, you establish the theoretical background of the study. So if it includes a theoretical construct, you define it, explain it using referring to the literature, other studies, other scholarly publications. And you also explain what other people have studied on that construct or topic relevant to your study. And you need to justify the need for your study in the literature review section, which usually includes a statement of a gap. The gap means that something that your study is providing that hasn't been conducted. So it could be something like that the study has never been conducted, or the study has been conducted but not in with this methodology or in this population. So things like that. So something that your a gap that your study is aiming to fill. This section, introduction or literature review section, ends with your research questions or hypotheses if you state hypotheses in quantitative studies, or you may have a purpose statement over there which will be relevant to the research questions. So you will see some articles don't explicitly state research questions but write a purpose statement over there. And then meta section start. Meta section is the section where you explain what you have done in conducting this study. So it should be detailed and clear enough so that the reader will understand what you have done, so it will increase the credibility of your study. If something is not clear there, it's going to have a negative effect on your study. The reviewers may reject your study if the method is not clear. They need to understand what you have done and how you have done them. For example, you need to give the context of your study, where you conducted the study, describe the context, and then you will need to describe participants, and about the participants you may mention their age, gender, ethnicity, linguistic background, and any other relevant information for your study. For example, in your study you may need to give information about socioeconomic status. Depending on the goal, you may need to give about educational background. You may need to give information about their literacy and even their habits, like how many books they read. So again, depending on the purpose, any relevant information about the participants need to be in the meta section. I'm not talking about the ones that you will give as results of your study. This is like describing your sample. And then another thing that you need to mention in the meta section is your instruments and materials that you use in your study. So instruments refers to data collection instruments. If you use a survey, you describe it. If you are, for example, an experimental study, and then you use some materials, for example, in experimental teaching, you need to describe that. And procedures refers to the steps you took in data collection and data analysis. How you collected data step by step, you explain it in detail, and also how you analyze the data. If you did quantitative, analysis, you describe what test you did. And if you, for example, validate your instruments, then you also need to give those in the method section, results of that validation, not the results that came out of the implementation of the survey. So the next section is the results and discussion section. These could be separate sections, or discussion can be embedded within the results section. So in the results section, you need to present the results clearly. It will have a text giving the results, but for clarity, you may need to have tables. For example, in quantitative studies, statistical results should be given in tables for to help ease of reading. And also figures may also make it can clarify your findings. So in the discussion part of it, or if the discussion is a separate section, it's where you evaluate and interpret your findings. So basically, it's about explaining or discussing why you found what you found. Yes, you found something, but what it means, you need to discuss them. And another thing that you do in the discussion section is that you discuss how your results confirm or go against other studies. So these studies could have already be mentioned in your literature review section. So you go back to them in the discussion section and explain such and such study found this, but in this study I found an opposite finding. So then you discuss why this might be the case. So you can say this difference may be because such and such. So you need to discuss all that. So you will need to make sense of your findings. And then in the discussion section, you may include a suggestions for further research or include suggestions for practical implications. So this suggestion for further research is something like, imagine you chose some procedures for your study, and if you believe that adding another component to that or conducting the study on the topic in a different way may give further insight, then you can suggest such research. For example, you didn't collect authentic data, elicited. You focused on just elicited data. You can, for example, call for research that collect authentic data. And practical implications is like practical consequences of your studies. Imagine you experimented on a new corrective feedback technique and you found that experimental situation, it gave positive outcome, that it works in the experimental setting. You can suggest, for example, teachers to implement it in real language classes. But these suggestions for further research and practical implications can also be integrated in the conclusion section, which is also acceptable. In the conclusion section, another thing that you do in the conclusion section is to summarize your main findings in a non-technical language which everybody can easily understand. And in the conclusion section is a good place also for you to discuss the limitations of your study. Limitations refer to, because of your choices, some weaknesses, we can say, of your study. For example, if you choose to work with a small sample size, it's a limitation. If you, for example, chose a single data collection method, which data triangulation may have actually enriched it, you can acknowledge that as a limitation. So if you have these sections in your article, obviously together with reference section, if there's appendix section with a good title, you will have a complete scholarly article. Thank you for listening.